And then, I see my wife, Jessica, standing outside my burning garage, smirking as she watches the flames consume everything I've spent years building. But that wasn't the worst of it, because then I noticed that I could see this. We have been married for 22 years, but in the past 3 months, Jessica seemed distant. She avoided our usual routines, and it didn't feel like her. Our argument last night left me drained. Jessica, known for her fiery temper and ability to hold a grudge, had always been strong-willed. I'm Rick Aldridge, her husband. This morning, when she said for what seemed like the 1,000th time, "I like the way you do it," the words unsettled me. Something about the way she said it felt different. I couldn't shake the tension growing between us lately. In the early days of our marriage, we were inseparable. Even when we worked, me as a mechanic, her at a department store, our bond felt unbreakable. Those were tough years financially, but they were full of love. I worked as a mechanic until I was 28, when a local auto shop owner offered me a management position. He valued my knowledge of cars and my ability to work with people. Over dinner, he explained his plan. I'd earn the same $60,000 salary for 10 years while he saved $20,000 annually toward a down payment for me to eventually buy the franchise. We shook hands on the deal. But when I told Jessica about the opportunity, she was furious I hadn't consulted her first, especially since there wasn't a formal contract. I tried explaining how it would benefit our family in the long run, but she wouldn't listen and ignored me for a week. I was nervous about how she'd react if the plan didn't work out. Her temper had cast a shadow over many moments, camping trips, birthdays, and even vacations. Jessica, always hardworking, went back to managing an insurance office after our kids were born. I understood her job stress might explain her worsening attitude over the years. About 2 years ago, though, things noticeably shifted. Her temper flared more often, and she began saying hurtful things that stung deeply. These past 3 months, in particular, had been incredibly tense. By Friday, after yet another rough week, Jessica came home late and demanded intimacy. Frustrated, I snapped, telling her I wasn't at her beck and call. That night, I slept in my son Mason's room. While grabbing clothes, I noticed a text on her phone from someone named EF that read, "So, did he do it?" Her earlier comment, "I like the way you do it," replayed in my mind, now with a whole new meaning. Was she comparing me to someone else? I felt sick, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. I couldn't find anything concrete to justify my suspicions, but I knew I needed proof. When I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed her phone on the nightstand. A message from EF caught my attention. I made a reservation for Wednesday afternoon. A hotel reservation? Over the next few days, I pretended to be sick and avoided interactions with her as much as possible. We still shared the same bed, but there was no intimacy. It's shocking how quickly love can turn into resentment. On Wednesday, I left work at lunch and drove to her office. Around 2:30, her boss left the building alone, and my suspicions wavered. But 15 minutes later, Jessica walked out, got into her car, and drove to a motel. I followed and parked out of sight. She pulled in next to her boss's car and greeted him. His name was Elton. They walked into a room together. I drove home in a rage. Mason was at baseball practice, giving me some time to think. Our house, located on the edge of town, had a garage I'd turned into my man cave. It had everything: a hoist for working on cars, tools, and even a bed for the times I was in the doghouse. I moved my clothes and toiletries into the garage, preparing for what was to come. When Jessica came home around 5:30, I was watching TV in the garage, ignoring her. She asked about Mason, and I replied coldly that he was likely out with friends. She then suggested we spend the evening together, clearly wanting something from me. Playing along, I agreed. As she came out of the bathroom, I looked at her and no longer saw the woman I had married. Instead, I saw a 42-year-old stranger. To cope, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine something else. Opening the nightstand drawer, I began rummaging. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Getting protection," I replied flatly, making it clear I didn't trust her. She exploded, yelling that I was a failure for not asking for a raise in 8 years. "I've lost all respect for you," she screamed. I calmly got dressed and left for the garage. From there, I could hear her screaming for me to come back and face her. Anticipating her temper, I called the police. Her rage only grew louder as she pounded on the garage door, shouting obscenities. Then, suddenly, it went quiet. Moments later, I smelled something burning. Looking out the window, I saw the garage engulfed in flames, and there was Jessica, standing outside, grinning. I escaped through a side window, twisting my ankle as I jumped. Crawling to safety, I could hear her hurling insults until the police arrived. One officer called the fire department while another restrained and handcuffed her. She screamed, "Take it away, you idiots! Burn his precious doghouse to the ground." At the station, I gave my statement while Jessica was charged with arson. The officer advised me to contact a lawyer and file a restraining order. That night, I called my attorney, who referred me to a criminal defense specialist. The next day, I filed a restraining order preventing Jessica from coming within 500 feet of me, my workplace, or our home. Jessica stayed in jail until her arraignment. When I told Mason and my daughter Megan what had happened, their reactions were vastly different. Megan wasn't surprised, having witnessed her mother's anger over the years. She hugged me and offered quiet support. Mason, on the other hand, was furious but promised he'd eventually come to terms with it. Over the weekend, I began dealing with the wreckage of the garage. Some tools were salvageable, but my diagnostic equipment was completely destroyed. Insurance coverage was uncertain since Jessica co-owned the property. Thinking back over everything, I realized the trust in our marriage was irreparably broken. Curious about Elton Forster, I started researching him online. He had been hired 2 years ago as a general manager at Jessica's office, the same time her behavior had begun to change. Divorced with 3 kids, he lived an hour away. I planned to reach out to Jessica's boss on Monday, someone I knew from company events and from servicing his car at my shop. On Sunday night, Jessica called. "I'm sorry for setting the garage on fire," she said. "So what?" I replied curtly. "Does that mean I can come home now?" she asked. "No. I filed a restraining order," I said. "Mom and Dad bailed me out," she added angrily. "I'm not thrilled," I retorted. "Neither am I. Can we talk and work this out?" she asked, her tone softening. "No, Jessica. There's nothing left to work out," I replied firmly. "Rick, you know I love you." "It's just my temper," she pleaded. "No, I don't know if you love me. If you did, you wouldn't have slept with your boss," I countered. "That's not true," she snapped defensively. "What's not true? That I don't know if you love me, or that you're sleeping with him?" I demanded. "Both," she replied. "Jessica, I saw you with him at the motel." "Don't deny it," I said. She gasped audibly, caught off guard. "Why?" I asked, pressing her for answers. "It was a mistake, a one-time thing," she claimed. "Nonsense, Jessica. I'm tired of your lies," I said before hanging up and shutting off my phone. About half an hour later, her father, Mr. Holmes, knocked on my door. He had always been like a second dad to me, but now his face was filled with confusion. "What did she tell you?" I asked him. "That you two had a fight and you kicked her out," he replied. "How did she explain being in jail?" I questioned. "She said she was burning your car manuals in the garage, and it got out of hand," he answered. Shaking my head, I told him, "You need to get the truth from her." "Are you going to tell me what happened?" he asked. "I don't think you want to hear it, Mr. Holmes," I replied. "Why the formalities? You know I consider you my son," he said. "Because soon, we won't have that relationship. You'll probably hate me," I explained. "Is it really that bad?" he asked hesitantly. I nodded, and he seemed to understand. No father wants to imagine his daughter doing such things. Later, I received a text from him. "I'm sorry. Jessica must have confessed." I could only imagine the heated arguments happening in their home that night. The divorce papers were served to Jessica discreetly at work. She called me immediately, starting with, "You goddamn prick." I hung up. I contacted Elton's ex-wife, Ruth, and explained my situation. She was more than willing to help. On Saturday, I made dinner reservations at Jessica's favorite restaurant and invited Mason and Megan. I wanted Jessica, and by extension Elton, to find out. The 3 of us arrived before Ruth. When she joined us, I introduced her to my kids. This is Ruth, Elton Forster's ex-wife, I explained. Ruth shared her story, recounting how Elton's infidelity led to their divorce. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. Without it, there's nothing, she said. By the end of dinner, we were openly discussing everything. Megan admitted she'd suspected something was wrong for over a year. After dinner, Megan asked if I was heading home. I'm asking Ruth to dance, I said with a smile. Ruth accepted, and we danced until 11 p.m. Afterward, I drove her to her hotel. The next morning, we had breakfast together, which caught the attention of the waitress. Gossip about us would undoubtedly reach Jessica. Jessica did find out and called, accusing me of seeing other women. Jessica, we're getting a divorce. Nothing you do will stop it, I told her firmly. She finally signed the papers after a conversation with her father. At Megan's graduation, I saw Jessica for the first time since our split. She looked older and thinner. Are you still seeing Elton's ex? She asked bitterly. Ruth is amazing, I replied. Where's Elton? He got fired and moved out of state, she admitted. You didn't love me enough, I said, walking away as she broke down in tears. The open house to sell our home was scheduled for the following Saturday. Despite the pending divorce, we agreed to host it together. Seeing her in familiar settings was painful, a stark reminder of what we'd lost. As I took out the trash, Jessica approached. Thank you for letting me help with this, she said quietly. You'll always be their mother, I replied, continuing with my task. Rick, can you look at me? She asked. I stopped and looked at her. I'm sorry for what I did to us, she said, her voice breaking. For the first time, she apologized for the affair. Why did you do it? I asked. She cried and ran out of the room, unable to answer. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. Last year, Megan received her college acceptance letter, and Mason opened his own auto repair shop. Jessica and I sold the house, splitting the modest equity left after taking out a second mortgage to pay for tuition and help Mason start his business. Jessica pleaded guilty to arson and received 2 years of probation, along with mandatory anger management classes and therapy. When the divorce was finalized, she asked to meet me for dinner. She looked nervous but healthier as she apologized once again. I lost respect for you, Rick. Elton seemed ambitious, and I saw you as stagnant. But now I understand the sacrifices you made for our family. I'm so sorry for what I did. Thank you, I replied. I appreciated the sentiment, though I doubted I'd ever take her up on it. On my way home, I called Ruth. Are you still available? I asked. I'm available, she replied. When can we meet? I inquired. Your place or mine? She asked. Yours, I said. We had a wonderful dinner at her house. Wanting to be upfront, I told her, Ruth, I really like you. I'm not sure where this is going, but I need you to know my reasons. First, you're an amazing woman. Second, I want revenge. You're the first person I've been with since my wife cheated on me, and I don't want you to feel used. I respect you. Ruth smiled. I've realized I want you too. Part of me wants revenge as well. I never got back at Elton for all the other women he cheated with. Let's even the score. With that, we headed to the bedroom. Lying next to Ruth, I thought about the nature of our connection. She was incredible, but I realized we couldn't build something meaningful on a foundation of shared resentment. Still, I could enjoy what we had for now. You're amazing, Ruth. You knew exactly what I needed, I told her. She laughed. You're an incredible lover. I can't believe your ex looked elsewhere. I hope we can keep this friends with benefits thing going, I said. She smiled. So do I. But I'm not ready for anything serious yet. That works for me, I replied. Oh, and let's make sure your ex finds out about us. I'll do the same with Elton, she said slyly. Sounds perfect, I said with a smirk. Later that evening, I texted Jessica. Call me when you have time. Monday works. Nothing urgent. She called within minutes. Are you taking me up on my offer? She asked. No, I'm exhausted. Ruth is very energetic, I replied. Silence followed before I heard her counting to 10. A sign her anger management classes were at least partially working. I didn't call you. I texted. You could have waited until Monday, she snapped. I'm sorry, she added, trying to recover. A week later, Elton showed up at my door. He burst in, yelling, "Stay away from my wife." "You mean your ex-wife? She kicked you out for cheating," I replied calmly. "Stay away from Ruth," he barked. "Why should I? She's amazing," I taunted. Elton lost his temper and swung wildly at me. I deflected his first punch but let the second one land, just enough to justify self-defense. After cleaning myself up, I called Ruth to let her know what had happened. "I know," she said. "Are you okay?" "Just a bit bruised, but he got the worst of it," I replied. "I'll be right over to play nurse," she said before hanging up. An hour later, she was at my place, taking care of me. I appreciated the company and the time to recover, especially since I worked a late shift the next day. Before leaving, Ruth kissed me and said, "I hope this continues. Your touch is magical." The next day at work, Jessica called. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Well, hello to you too," I said. "Yeah, hi. What did you do?" she pressed. "He broke into my place and attacked me," I explained. "That's not what he said," she countered. "Oh, so you're taking his word over mine?" "Sounds about right," I said sarcastically. "He's not my lover anymore." "That ended over a month ago," she insisted. That Thursday, I went to Smitty's, the bar Jessica and I used to frequent. Sometimes, familiar places can bring clarity. While sipping a beer at a small table, I heard a familiar laugh. Jessica was there with her office friends. She spotted me but quickly led her group to a table far from mine. After about 10 minutes, 2 women from her group headed to the restroom. One stopped at my table. "You're Jessica's ex, right?" she asked with a twinkle in her eye. I nodded. "I've heard a lot about you," she said, smirking. I wasn't sure what she'd heard, but I doubted it was flattering. On their way back, both women stopped to flirt with me. One of the women at the bar that night was about 10 years younger than me, and the other around 15. Unlike men, they didn't seem to mind flirting with a friend's ex. I played along, thinking it might irritate Jessica. As they left, one slipped me her business card. Samantha Galbraith. I glanced at Jessica and noticed a flicker of sadness on her face, quickly masked by her usual anger. Reflecting on my past with her, I realized I still loved her in some way, but life with Jessica had been like living next to a volcano, always bracing for the next eruption. If she hadn't cheated, I might have stayed, but was I better off now? I honestly wasn't sure. On Saturday morning, I dialed Samantha's number. "Hello?" she answered. "Hi, Samantha. This is Rick Aldrich. We met at Smitty's on Thursday," I said. "Yes, I remember. The handsome man sitting alone," she teased. I blushed. I was just unwinding and thinking. "Would you like to talk about it?" she asked. "Yeah, I think I would," I replied. "How about tonight?" she suggested. "Sure. Smitty's at 7:30? I proposed. "I'll be there," she said warmly. I felt nervous. What could a younger woman possibly see in me? I hadn't dated in over 25 years. I dressed in business casual, wanting to make an effort. When Samantha and I met that evening, we clicked right away. She was engaging, charming, and stunning. Once I felt comfortable, I asked her what had been on my mind. "You work with my ex, so you've probably heard bad things about me. Why would you want to date me?" "Before she got involved with Elton, she used to talk about you in a way that intrigued me. She seemed genuinely impressed by you," Samantha explained. Later, when she and Elton started socializing more at work events, I began noticing changes. From what I gathered, the affair likely began about 3 months before you served her with divorce papers, she added. Her timeline matched what I'd noticed about Jessica's behavior. Samantha continued, "During bachelorette parties, your ex actually talked about how satisfied she was with you." She paused, giving me an intense look. "So naturally, I'm curious." I blushed, not expecting Jessica to have discussed me in such detail. Samantha smiled. "Don't be embarrassed. If you're as good as she said, this is going to be fun." We finished our food and drinks, and the waitress handed me a receipt with a smile, saying, "Keep this. You might win something." Her cryptic wink left me puzzled, but I slipped the receipt into my pocket. As Samantha and I walked out, she took my hand. "Now for dessert," she said softly. "Your place or mine?" I asked, surprised but intrigued. "I'd rather go to your place. You can tell a lot about someone by how they live," she said. She hopped into my truck, meaning I'd have to drive her back later for her car. When we got to my house, we went straight to the bedroom. By the time we fell asleep, it was nearly 10 a.m. The next day, we had lunch before I dropped her off at her place. Samantha made me promise to call her again, and I assured her I would. On my way home, I found the receipt from Smitty's in my wallet. Written on it was the waitress's name, Kate, and her number. This new reality, women showing interest in me, was going to take some getting used to. On Monday, after work, I went back to Smitty's and found Kate there. She was closer to my age, and we struck up a conversation. I asked her out, and since weekends were busy for her, we planned a Wednesday date, her day off. As I walked to my truck, my phone rang. "Hello, Rick. It's Grace. We met last Thursday night at Smitty's with Samantha," a woman said. "Oh yes, I remember you," I said. "Samantha told me she had a great time with you on Saturday. I was wondering if we could go out sometime," she suggested. "Aren't I a bit old for you?" I asked. "Not at all. I prefer older guys. They're more mature and easier to get along with," she replied. We agreed to meet that Saturday, and Grace proved to be an enthusiastic and lively companion. My Wednesday date with Kate went just as well. Like Samantha and Ruth before her, she said, "I like the way you do it." On Sunday, Ruth invited me to dinner. After an amazing meal, we spent the evening together. I was beginning to enjoy single life. On Monday night, Jessica called. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Sitting here watching TV," I replied, playing dumb. "No, I mean you, a 40-year-old man dating women 10 and 15 years younger. Don't you have any remorse?" she asked. "You must be talking about Samantha and Grace," I said. "Yes, of course," she confirmed. "They both asked me out. Dating has changed. I like not having to ask a woman out and face rejection. It's nice to feel wanted," I explained. "Well, stop dating people I work with," she snapped. "Why would I do that?" I asked. "Because I said so," she replied. "We're not married anymore. I'll date whoever I choose," I asserted. "You're doing this just to make my life harder," she accused. "No, but if it does, that's a bonus," I teased. "How does dating them affect you?" "They whisper behind my back. They say, 'I can't believe she let him go.' It's humiliating," she admitted. "I'll ask them to keep things private if that helps," I offered. "No, just stop seeing them," she demanded. "That's not going to happen unless they want to end it," I said firmly. "You're an a-hole," she said, hanging up. By Thursday, Jessica called again, this time about Kate. "The waitress at Smitty's?" "Really?" she said. "I thought you didn't want me dating younger women," I replied. "I don't want you dating at all. I'm constantly answering questions about why I let you go," she fumed. "Tell them I wasn't right for you. Or that you found someone more compatible," I suggested. After a pause, she muttered, "I'll just tell them I was stupid," and hung up. Sitting back, I reflected on our life together. We had good times, but things began unraveling when Elton was hired. Maybe the affair started sooner than I realized. Now, Jessica seemed remorseful. That night, Samantha called. "What's up?" she asked. "Just bought a case of beer to drown my sorrows," I replied. "Can I help with that?" she offered. "You might be just what the doctor ordered," I said. Over the next year, my list of friends with benefits grew. Samantha, Grace, Ruth, and Kate all enjoyed spending time with me, and I didn't turn any of them down. Each woman brought something unique to the table, and my confidence soared. One day, Jessica asked me out at Smitty's. We were good together. "Why not for old time's sake?" she suggested. "I can't," I said. When we were together, everything I did was out of love. The day finally arrived when I was awarded the Auto Pro Supply franchise. The owner had kept his word, and I was able to purchase it under generous terms. It set me up for a prosperous future. I took out a loan to secure the deal, but the business was thriving, and I wasn't worried about repaying it. Originally, I'd pursued this opportunity to create financial stability for Jessica and me. Now, it was solely for me. That evening, I called Jessica and invited her to dinner. She agreed, and I made reservations at the finest restaurant in town. I even arranged for a car to pick her up and told her to dress elegantly. When she arrived, she looked stunning in a long black dress that complemented her red hair and green eyes beautifully. For a moment, I remembered why I had fallen in love with her all those years ago. "You look amazing, Jessica," I said. "Thank you. You look very handsome in that tuxedo," she replied. "What's the occasion?" "I'm celebrating, and I wanted you to be the first to know," I said. "Now I'm curious," she said with a smile. "Let's enjoy the meal first," I suggested. As we ate, our conversation became meaningful, reflective even. Finally, she leaned forward and asked, "What are we celebrating?" "Jessica, after we married, I worked as a mechanic. You seemed content, but I always felt stuck. When I told you about the job at Auto Pro Supply, hoping for a more flexible schedule, you were furious," I began. "I remember," she said softly, lowering her gaze. "I did it for us, for our family. It was all to make our lives better," I continued. "And I ruined it all," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't bring you here to relive bad memories," I said gently. "Today, I signed the paperwork to buy the Auto Pro Supply franchise with 4 stores." She looked stunned. "This will ensure that our children will have a strong inheritance. They can either run the franchise or sell it. Our grandchildren will benefit too," I added. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I can't tell you how happy that makes me. I listened to Elton when he called you a failure with no ambition. I lost faith in you, and I ruined everything. You were a great husband, father, and lover, and I threw it all away. I'm so sorry, Rick. I hope you believe me. I'm sorry for everything I did that got us here," she said, her voice trembling. Suddenly, she stood, tears streaming, and headed to the restroom. A server followed her in. I hadn't expected my news to affect her so deeply. Tonight was meant to celebrate the future wealth for our children and grandchildren, not to reopen old wounds. I signaled the server for the check, knowing she wouldn't want to continue the evening. When she returned, I stood and said, "I've already paid the bill. Let me take you home." "Thank you. I'm sorry I ruined your evening," she said, her eyes still wet with tears. She cried quietly during the ride home. I wanted to hug her, but I didn't want to send the wrong message. At her apartment door, she hesitated, looking at me as if inviting me in. "I'm sorry, Jessica, but we can't go back there," I said. She nodded, then closed the door. The next couple of years were filled with running the business and meeting new people. Word of mouth turned out to be the best advertising, and I always took precautions with my personal life. Jessica and I occasionally spoke, mostly about the kids. Mason got engaged to Fiona Dodson, a kind woman he met at his store. For their engagement party, we rented a room at the Sheraton and brought in sandwiches from Subway. I arrived early to help Mason set up. As we were finishing, Jessica arrived. She still looked good after all these years. "We never had an engagement party," she said. "No, but everyone we knew us," I replied. "Do you remember proposing to me?" she asked. "Yes, I do," I said, feeling a twinge of old emotion. "Sometimes, I wanted to hurt you because you hurt me so much," she said quietly. I said I was sorry. "Can't we move on?" "It's been 3 years," she pleaded. "Today is about Mason and Fiona. Let's just be cordial," I said firmly. "Maybe we could be cordial from now on," she added in her usual demanding tone. As the guests arrived, Mason and Fiona greeted everyone. About 45 minutes into the party, I heard Fiona call out, "Mom." I turned to see a beautiful woman in a floral sundress. She had blonde hair, deep blue eyes, and a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "That's Fiona's mom, Ashley. She's very religious and not into your lifestyle," Mason said quietly. "Mason, before your mother left, I was a one-woman man. I want someone I can trust again," I replied. "I don't know if she'd give you a chance, but I'll introduce you," he offered. "That would be great," I said. Mason led me to Fiona and her mother. "Mrs. Dodson, this is my father, Rick," he said. "Now, it would just be out of convenience," I said, watching Jessica's face fall. "I understand," she replied softly and returned to her table. "You can call me Mom now," Ashley said warmly. Jessica quickly interjected, "as long as he doesn't forget who his real mother is." Mason introduced Jessica to Ashley, and they hugged, quickly striking up a conversation. I stepped back, wanting to make my first impression on Ashley on my terms. The next morning, I attended Ashley's church, feeling out of place in my sharp suit among casually dressed congregants. When the service began, Ashley sang with the praise band, her voice beautiful and calming. She noticed me during the third song and smiled warmly. After the service, we had breakfast at Cracker Barrel. When the small talk faded, Ashley got to the point. So, Rick, I've heard some things about you. People say you're a womanizer. What do you have to say about that? She asked bluntly. I'm not a womanizer, I said. After Jessica cheated on me and set my garage on fire, I started dating again. Women approached me, and I didn't say no. But I never chased anyone or treated them poorly. If that makes me a womanizer, then I guess I'm guilty. Ashley studied me carefully. So where do I fit into all this? You're different. I want to get to know you and maybe build something meaningful, I said honestly. And Jessica? Didn't she want to get back together? Forgiveness is possible, but forgetting isn't. Without trust, there's no foundation, I replied. Ashley smiled. I appreciate your honesty. Let's see where this goes. Over the next 4 months, Ashley and I grew closer. My interest in other women faded, and when Ashley finally said she was ready to commit, I knew I had found someone special. I love you, I told her. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she replied. 3 months later, we had a small wedding surrounded by family and friends. Jessica didn't attend, but I knew it was too painful for her to see me move on. I had finally found happiness and peace, and this time, I wasn't looking back.